Oh, hey, what's up, guys? Downright Frightening, episode 3. Now, where were we?
Whoa! So this is Radioland, huh?
You got any idea how much blood jets out of a guy's neck in his throat?
Are you weird?
Yes, I am weird.
Do you know what the most frightening thing in the world is? It's here.
All right, and here we are with episode 3 of the Downright Frightening podcast. Brother Cole, I would like to take 1 minute to recognize the absolute greatness of the legendary Bob Seger. I saw Bob Seger in concert last night on his final tour, and holy shit, at 73 years old, I was absolutely blown away by this man's performance. He played for a full 2 hours. And the whole time I just couldn't help but think, like, all these douchebags that are running around on SoundCloud making quote unquote music, they could really learn a lot from some of these OGs out there that are running around finishing up their careers with one last tour. I was fortunate enough to see Kiss about 2 weeks ago on the same thing on their final tour. And it's amazing the level of competency with their craft compared to these guys that are running around these days. But anyway, now that I'm off my soapbox, good morning, sir. How are you?
I am good. Ready to get into episode 3.
Me too. So if any of you did not figure it out by some of the hints that we dropped last week in episode number 2, we are covering the 1986 classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Part 2. This fantastic, yes, you heard me correct, fantastic sequel miraculously is not rated, and it does take place about 13 years after the original 1974 classic. It was directed by Tobe Hooper, and it starred, oddly enough, Dennis Hopper, the very lovely and talented Caroline Williams, Bill Moseley, and Bill Johnson as Leatherface. What a ridiculous cast of characters this movie has in it. Looking back at it now, it's pretty awesome. Dennis Hopper and Caroline Williams and Bill Moseley all in the same movie. And then the movie itself is just such a prize. I love Bill Moseley. He is one of my all-time favorites. He is such a versatile actor and has played in some of my favorite movies. Some of my top movies, including The Devil's Rejects, House of a Thousand Corpses, Tom Savini's remake of Night of the Living Dead, and of course, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Part 2. Let's go ahead and jump right into the deep end of the pool and listen to a quick trailer for the movie.
"13 years ago, audiences across America were horrified by the savagery of a faceless killer. In the wake of this bizarre rampage, he vanished. Now, after more than a decade of silence, he has come out of hiding. Texas Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. The Buzz is back. Directed by Tobe Hooper.
All right, so that is that's a really good trailer. There's not much to it, but it's just enough to make you interested. What I like on there is he says the killer with no he say the killer with no face. The face no, he said the faceless killer, which is funny because he actually had two faces, his and the one that he's wearing. So it's a really good traiailer. I mean, it sets it up
honestly,
nicely without overdoing it.
I don't know if you could come up with a better trailer for this movie. If for any of you that haven't seen it, it's basically just the saw, the blade of the saw, and Leatherface is greasing it and oiling it, and getting it ready for action. Mm-hmm. And then you cut to some quick scenes of the movie, but it's very short, very sweet, and it would definitely reel me into the theaters. And I love that after such a long time, there was 13 years between the two movies roughly, and if you were in theaters at that time, you wouldn't be it's not like today. Unless you got a subscription to Fangoria or some of the other magazines, you might not have known that what movies were coming out, or you didn't have any clue like we have now about movies, years in advance when they're coming out and when they're making them and when they're developing them. So this would have been a complete surprise, and you just kind of have it dropped in your lap. And then not only do you find out you're getting a sequel, but you are also getting the amazingly beautiful Caroline Williams plus Dennis Hopper. Jesus Christ. I just don't know what I would be thinking had I sat through the theaters watching some other bullshit, and then I have this dropped in my lap completely unexpectedly. So let's go ahead and dive into the review for the film. This particular movie has a very, very special place in my heart. Probably about 1995. I was about 10 years old, and I saw the Mark Harmon classic, Summer School. Shout out to Mark Harmon, the original Ted Bundy. I saw Summer School, which is a great, great movie. Not in the horror genre, of course, but there are two characters in that movie named Chainsaw and Dave. And Chainsaw and Dave love horror movies, particularly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So they reference the movie a whole lot. Believe it or not, living in Texas, I was not aware of this franchise at the age of 10. So I went to old school, local family-owned video store, Man's Video. And at Man's Video, they had a horror section that was just unbelievable. But they treated it like the porn room. So you had to kind of go in the back and the dark, and it was kind of dingy. There might have been some dudes back there doing crack or, doing something seedy. But that's where all the movies were. And so you just had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of VHS tapes all displayed, and you could walk up and down these dimly lit aisles and pick the one you wanted. So I did that a lot after this, but this was my first adventure into the back. And lo and behold, they did not have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, they did have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. And so I picked that up, and I took it home as fast as I could and watched it, and I was blown away. There's so many things about this movie. Caroline Williams, whoa. But she did a really great job playing Stretch. Our main character, our hero, if you will, and Bill Moseley, first time I saw him on TV or on film, and just could not believe my eyes. You got a Vietnam veteran scratching his partially exposed plate with a coat hanger, lighting it on fire and eating it. I've just, some of those scenes with him just stuck with me for a long time, and I didn't even know who he was for a long time. And then I started watching some other movies and seeing him and kind of figuring out, his history. And so I've got to the point now where I try to watch just about everything that he's in. But I thought that he did a fantastic job as Chop Top. And it's really a credit to Bill and his work, because that was, if you look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise as a whole, for all the praise that it gets, it doesn't, it's not really known for its acting or its character acting. And Chop Top could have been everything that he was. The character could have been everything he was had Bill even played him at like 50% of what he did. But I thought that the scene with him and Caroline when they're in the radio station, when he kind of just pops up and he wants to buy some radio airtime, I love that. That's like a really, really strong 20 minutes in the movie. But just, it's one of my favorites. And I wish that more people would watch it because it's a good one.
Yeah, it's definitely a really good movie, and it's been a while since I've seen it, so I rewatched it, and I enjoyed it this time just as much as I did the first time. It's crazy. I mean, they got the perfect cast of odd characters in here, and Chop Top is he's just a strange dude throughout the whole movie. He's a Vietnam vet, but in some parts of it, he's like a 12-year-old kid, and he's dancing around with the corpse as his little puppet, So it's Caroline Williams does a great job playing Stretch. I mean, she's the hero throughout the whole. I mean, even though Dennis Hopper's in there, he's on his own mission, and Caroline Williams is going to take him down herself. It seems like.
I mean, I really feel like, no disrespect to Dennis Hopper, but there's a lot of times throughout horror history where large, big name actors have been paid good sums of money to play in movies that they didn't really want to be in. I would go back to the biggest case of that being Donald Pleasance for Halloween 1. So sometimes they don't always like get into the role as much as they should, but of course not Donald Pleasance. Like that ended up being some of his favorite work was that franchise. But I just feel like Dennis Hopper was kind of mailing it in, but he was such a great actor that even mailing it in, he still turned in a pretty good performance. And I think he did everything that he needed to do, because like you said, Caroline was, she was the story. The on-air time is not even close compared to the two. And, like you said, he's there for one reason. He doesn't really give a fuck about anybody else, but avenging his niece and nephew, which I think is a really interesting plot point. To come back 13 years later, and it's basically like the victims from part one's uncle out for revenge. One really great scene with Dennis Hopper is when he goes to the chainsaw store and he picks up his chainsaws. That I remember watching that for the first time, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is going to be insane. One of the heroes in the movie is going to get chainsaws to fight a family that is known for the one member that uses a chainsaw. So it was just crazy.
He came in. I mean, he knows what he's walking into too, because he doesn't just get one chainsaw; he gets all three.
And he holsters them like balls.
And he's got like spare chains. He's got his straps across his chest with his spare chains in there just in case. But I mean,
I had never noticed that until I watched it prior to getting ready for this episode. I had never noticed the spare chains, and I thought, like, because I just thought he had some like accoutrement on his suit, because he's wearing that Western leisure suit, so there's no fucking telling what's all on that thing. There's probably doodads and shit hanging all off of it, so I never paid attention. But then I noticed it, and I was like, it's silly, but like whoever put that on there, that was a really clever thing, because it just showed how prepared he was to go into battle. I mean, after all, he was the Lord of the Harvest, so he needed to be as prepared as possible to do the Lord's work. One thing that really, really stuck out, and actually my 11-year-old watched this with me about a year ago, and he enjoyed this part as much as I did, but when poor LG gets his face cut off, and he's continuing to hack and spit as he's finally biting the big one down in that cavernous hellhole that the Sawyer family called home. It's just something else. That entire movie, there's twists and turns at every corner, and you never know exactly what you're going to get, all the way up until the very end. And I think it's why it's one of my favorites. But this for me, this was one of the beginnings of one of the biggest plot holes in this entire series, and nobody ever talks about this, but it's just odd to me that there's a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies now, and I'm not talking about the remakes, which are both pretty good standalone films. But if you go through part 1 and then part 2 and then part 3, there's a fourth one, but I wouldn't consider that part of the original storyline. But the third installment, it's almost like, to me, it's almost like all of these movies are standalone, even though part 2 says, that he's their uncle and he's avenging them or whatever, but it's never the same characters, with the exception of Bubba. And Drayton is in the original one as well, but in part 3 there's a mom. There's not any damn moms in any of the rest of them. So they always I think they just are like interchanging Bubba and dropping him in different storylines,
Yeah, it's like
none of them are really tied together except 1 and 2. But even 1 and 2, there's some big holes. Like, where's anybody else? They just, where was Chop Top in part 1, for example? Probably just reading too much into it, because it is a movie about a guy who wears people's flesh and uses a chainsaw to kill them. I think it's really interesting, though, about this movie is that so many people would argue with you if you told them that it was not a true story, especially growing up in Texas. It's one of those things. More people tend to believe that it's a true story than would say that it is not. And I think that the franchise does a really good job of continuing to egg that on all the way up to the remake, where they used they used a little bit of found footage to try to further sell the fact that it was a true story. But
yeah,
like I said, it's not rocket science, just probably reading into it too much about the whole family thing. But with the movie being so firmly based on a family, and the fact that, Bubba is the henchman of this family, it's just weird that there's no carry through from movie to movie of the actual family.
yeah.
Anyway.
It's almost like with these different stories, the main character is Bubba, but it's almost like, how do you put this? Like, it's like different. You know how, like, when you watch, like, there's like the Marvel universe, there's different versions of it. Or like there's different versions of Spider-Man. There's different versions of Bubba. It's always in Texas. It's always the chainsaw killer, but the story around it changes, like different universes. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Because even the locations, like if you watch, and I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the third installment, it's called Leatherface, and I'm pretty sure if anybody out there is listening, we'll find out. You can email us and tell me how wrong I am at downrightpodcast@gmail.com. But I'm pretty sure, without looking it up, that the third installment is called Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3.
It is.
So it's just weird that in that one, they're like out in the middle of the desert. There's mountains and shit in the background. And then part 1 and 2, we're somewhere outside Dallas, in that part of the state. And then all of a sudden you shift over, you're out in West Texas, middle of nowhere in the desert. But whatever. Anyway.
Yeah. And part 3, what cracks me up about part 3 is, how it's kind of a thing. I don't know, it probably isn't in California, but in Texas, the rivalry between Texas and California. And in part 3, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he's killing 2 people from California as they travel on their way through Texas.
Yes, and shout out to some of the greatest actors that are sneaking in under the radar in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. There's some really good actors in that movie, really highly acclaimed actors in that movie that kind of slip in under the radar and play in a really disgusting horror movie that they probably regret now. Also, side note, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 4, which That one might not be actually called Part 4, but it is the 4th installment. It has Matthew McConaughey in it. So, anyway, one thing is for sure. If you have been fortunate enough to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, you should feel very fortunate because you are one of tens of thousands of people that witnessed Bubba's chainsaw losing its virginity to Stretch's jorts. Extremely hot stuff. Sometimes sequels suck. Most of the time, they should not have even been made in the first place. But this little amazing piece of cinematic gold absolutely should have been made, and I love it. The sickening statistics for this fantastic cinematic adventure are as follows. A shocking 5 corpses. There's a lot of assumed death in this movie, but I'm going to go with a 5 on this because you could say 5 for sure. I think that there's some that are questionable. So we're going to go with 5. 1 pair of dead douchebag dildos. If you don't know who that is, that's the 2 guys in the beginning. The 45-year-old high school students that are on their way to the Texas OU weekend. Thank God they died early. 1 ruined Sonny Bono wig. Poor Chop Top. You know, it must be hell trying to cover up a plate that you cannot stop scratching and eating. And his favorite was the Sonny Bono wig that Leatherface destroyed. 1 emergency hemorrhoid removal via chainsaw. This is one of my favorite parts, and it cracks me up every time. Poor Drayton gets a hemorrhoidectomy when Lefty's chainsaw goes up his ass crack. Love it. 1 chainsaw duel. Who would have thought? And Dennis Hopper in a leisure suit. I would be remiss if I did not mention one more time Caroline Williams. At an easily consumed 1 hour and 40 minutes, for my money, this sequel is almost better than the original. I think the original gets a lot of credit where credit is due because it was so revolutionary and it was so bizarre and it really shocked so many people. But for me, for overall watchability and enjoyability, Part 2 almost takes over. I'm going to give this one a gore score of 10. And if you have any reason to question me, I would just direct you to A, watch the movie, and B, if you have watched the movie and you still don't think that the gore score of 10 is justified, please go to 55 minutes into the movie and then tell me I'm wrong at downrightpodcast@gmail.com. One of the reasons why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is believed to be such a true story is because most of it was based on the heinous crimes of Mr. Ed Gein. Old King Cole, please enlighten us about young Eddie G.
Oh, let's talk about young Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. All right, so Ed was a strange fellow, to say the least, you know, and he also inspired a number of movies, you know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but also Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, you know, Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses trilogy, things. I mean, there's a lot of movies that this guy inspired just by the heinousness of what he did. What's weird, though, is that Ed only confessed to and is believed to have only actually killed 2 people. The tavern owner, Mary Hogan, and hardware store owner named Bernice Wharton. What's funny is that Mary Hogan is a tavern owner of a tavern that Ed used to frequent a lot, and Ed was there after she disappeared, and they were like, "Oh, we're searching for Mary," and Ed actually told them, "Oh yeah, she's back at my place," but nobody believed her. They believed him. They just wrote it off as crazy old Ed, you know. So they should have listened. He tried to tell them, but you know, and there was a hardware store owner named Bernice Warden. But the rest of the bodies that he had, that he cut up and everything, he actually got them out of fresh graves after people would die, and he'd dig them up and he'd put them in the back of his 1949 Ford sedan because, I mean, nothing hauls a dead body like a Ford.
That's what I'm talking about.
So let me tell you a little bit about Ed's life growing up. He grew up in a household with his older brother Henry. He had this timid, drunk father, George, and a dominating mother, Augusta, who berated her children with preachings of the dangers of women and their sinful, lustful, vile ways. And
Bitch.
she didn't even let Ed have any friends or even much contact with the outside world apart from going to school. And when Ed would go to school and he'd come back like, "Oh, Mommy, I made a new friend," she'd be like, "That friend's the devil."
Oh
That's
my
just
God.
that's just the way she treated him. And so everybody was the devil. The only perfect person, especially as far as women were concerned, was her.
Mm.
So Ed began to love his mother more than any person should love their mother. In fact, that's what the relationship between Ed and his mother is what inspired the movie Psycho.
Exactly. Yeah. You can
And
definitely
then,
tell the similarities like right off the bat.
yep, and then when she died is really when Ed pretty much lost it and did the truly disturbing things he did with the bodies that he exhumed from the graves. And but what's funny is it's also a myth that Ed consumed the bodies. He wasn't a cannibal aside from chewing on the occasional nipple every now and then. Because,
Oh. Oh yeah.
yeah, so he never swallowed. He just chewed it, spit it back out. So he couldn't call him a cannibal. But when the police finally did catch up with Ed, they found a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm gonna run down a short list here of some
Hit
of
me
the
with
things
it.
that they found. A wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedpost, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso, skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human skin, leg skin, mask made from the skin of female heads, including Mary Hogan's face. He had actually skinned it off and was making a mask out of it. They found it in a paper bag, found her skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack, a belt made from female human nipples, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face. That that's interesting. That's a smile that could light up a room. So, like, needless to say, Ed was the inspiration for these movies, and what a character he was.
You know what? I feel like it's only a matter of time though with like the bullshit. Like, have you ever seen like a quote unquote fashion show, and like, they're wearing out all this bullshit. Like they wear like, oh this is our summer line. This dude that's coming out, he's wearing a bathrobe made out of kites. Like so it's only a matter of time before somebody gets the bright idea that like they're gonna start doing some of this nonsense
Oh,
that Ed's
oh,
doing. I mean, look,
we
Gucci
kind of
just did that blackface, the blackface sweater. Like, who in the fuck thought that was a good idea?
It's
I
funny you
mean,
say that
seriously.
because you remember not that long ago. Well, I say not that long. It's been a couple years now, but remember old Lady Gaga wearing a meat suit to the music awards.
Oh yeah, and that like she got praised for that. I mean, outside of like the PETA freaks and the vegans and all that, like people were just so proud of her for being so brave that she wore meat. So I feel like it's only a matter of time. This week on What You Streamin', I be streaming Don't Kill It. I was actually turned on to Don't Kill It by one of the Facebook groups, the horror Facebook group. Shout out to all the Facebook horror groups. But somebody posted a screenshot of Don't Kill It, and it looked interesting enough, so I decided to check it out. It's a 2017 movie starring Dolph Lundgren. It was very, very simple plot, which is great for a horror movie. And basically, what it is a demon jumps from body to body based on who kills it. So if you're possessed by a demon and then someone kills you, the demon jumps into your body. So it's like a lose-lose situation. It was an extremely violent movie, just gore at every turn. And what I really liked about it too was it seemed like there was a really, really good mix of CGI and real horror gore, and you cannot beat the real shit to me. The CGI just always comes off looking a little bit fake, but it at least looked like there was a lot of real gore. Pretty fun movie. If you can leave your snobbiness at home, you might enjoy this one. Check it out on Netflix.
All right, so for me, I was streaming a Netflix original horror movie called Velvet Buzzsaw, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Renee Russo. So I was suggested this movie by a friend of mine, and I have to say that's not one of my favorites by far. I don't understand how people can look at paintings that look like a kindergartner made them and say they're worth so much money. I guess it's the same people who think Bill Nye really is a science guy. But I do,
Yes.
but I do enjoy watching those highfalutin people get killed by evil art, and that's exactly what this movie is about. A man is found dead, and a neighbor girl is trying to make it in the art game, and any to impress her boss at the art gallery steals his paintings, and that's that he was trying to destroy himself, and whoever profits off of him ends up getting killed. I felt like there was a lot of stuff in this movie that didn't really pertain to the main story itself that could have been taken out, and dropped the movie from 2 hours to about an hour and a half. But other than that, it's a decent movie with a lot of gore. There's some pretty artsy deaths in there, but overall, I'd give it a 5 out of 10.
So my problem just hearing about that movie is my issue is going to be that it's 2 hours, roughly 2 hours. That sounds like some bullshit to me. You get some of these Hollywood types, especially like your boy Jake Gyllenhaal, and they just can't help but show all of us just how smart they are and how clever they are and how great of an actor they are. And you know what? I really don't care. It's all bullshit. Not to mention, you're going to star in a movie that's full of gore and murdering and blood and violence and all this shit, and then you're going to go on TV and tell all of us that we should be more friendly and not be not be violent, not have guns, blah 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 blah. But you're making millions of dollars on a craft that is centered around blood and guts and violence and gore, and so bitch, please don't come tell me what I can and can't do and what I can and can't watch when you're going to make money on the backs of making pieces of shit like Velvet Dog shit or whatever it was. So, on that note, that brings me to a perfect segue of Creeper in the Theater. The only issue is, this episode, we do not have a Creeper in the Theater because modern horror sucks. So we are going to introduce, on this episode, a new segment entitled, What's in Your Box? Overlord. Great little movie. I saw the trailer for Overlord during Halloween 2018, and I was definitely interested. I didn't know anything about the video game, which it turns out is nothing like the movie. I looked up. I was going to go buy it after I watched the movie, and I saw some big, brutish, cartoon Viking-looking character with a big, goofy sword and some magic, and so I closed that browser pretty quick. But the movie is really good. World War II, weird experiments, the eve of D-Day. These guys are like the unknown heroes to D-Day, and it was really interesting. And there's tons of dead Nazi assholes, which is always great. Very, very healthy amount of gore, and I would actually love to see a sequel to this movie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie, and what was really neat about this movie is that a lot of horror movies now are using a lot of CGI for their effects and things, but this movie didn't do that. This movie had a lot more of old school stuff like the puppeteering and things like that for certain scenes. And it's really, and so I feel like you get a better response from the actors when they're, actually seeing this stuff instead of it being put in later after the acting's all done. So I thought it was a really good movie. The storyline was great. I love when there's some kind of Nazi zombie, thing going on. That's always awesome. So I really enjoyed that movie as well.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. The real gore and monster makeup makes a movie, and I did feel like there was a lot of that in this. And if not, then they had a multi-million dollar CGI budget. But like I said, most of the time, it seems like people rely heavily on CGI but don't put enough into the budget, so it ends up looking like dog shit.
Mm-hmm.
It is rated R, and you can find it today in a red box near you. On the next episode, we're going to be covering an amazing little flick directed by George Romero, and it may or may not have Tom Atkins in it. Old King Cole, I think that about does it for EP3. What say you?
That sounds good to me. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
That's right. And if you have any questions or comments, please drop us a note at downrightpodcast@gmail.com. And as Brother Cole said, you can always keep up with our shenanigans if you like, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Downright Podcast. We are currently broadcasting on YouTube, Podbean, and SoundCloud, and we are still working with the liberal assholes at Apple to get on their streaming service. So We will see you guys next time. Toodaloo.
Adios.
Take it off the air now, please.
It can't end.
Stop it now. Turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.